that smoking gun I'm going to explain in this brief presentation. And the good news is that the smoking gun, all the science was done way before I was born. That's how old it is. But somehow it escaped, which is, it takes a big leap in my imagination how this escaped the medical establishment throughout the world. And so what I'm going to show you is actually the cure to PTSD. Now, being the professional that I am, I say that word cure with some trepidation. I should. As a scientist, I should have some trepidation. But I have to tell the truth about what I found, right? If I believe, and I would stake my reputation that it is, shouldn't I say that? So, here's the thing. The first thing right out of the box is that trauma isn't the cause of PTSD, even though the word trauma is in the word, or the acronym PTSD. So it's very misleading. And I'm going to show you what does cause it. It's caused by a stress syndrome. It's a collection of problems. And if you go look at the DSM-5, the statistical manual, the diagnostic manual for mental health disorders, and you look up this problem, and you go to the back of this section, and you look up the worst level of PTSD would be so-called level 5, completely disabling. It says there in summary, this is a disorder of extreme stress. That's all. Those are not my words, that's the words out of the manual. So, the experience of it and our suffering. Those of you that I know in this room, I know about your suffering, and you may know about some of mine in my history. We experience suffering. I would definitely say it's somewhat physical, but suffering that's mental, the anguish of that is much worse. Talking to a Vietnam vet, I'll bet you'll agree.
Not a Vietnam vet, but my all my friends.
Vietnam era.
Yes, that era, and I had a lot of people come back that were completely disabled.
So you've seen that suffering
Yeah.
firsthand.
Yeah.
And anybody in here not seen that suffering in their life? So, but it's a physical problem. And it does start with breathing, the diaphragmatic breathing problem. It does start with that. In fact, that is the smoking gun. Because no matter how you gerrymander the variables in breathing, if the diaphragm isn't functioning, it basically comes down to a simple math problem. You can't get enough oxygen in a stressed body particularly, which needs a lot more oxygen than a non-stressed body. Does that make sense to everybody so far?
Oh, yeah.
So, and PTSD ties into sleep. So we're gonna take a look at that as well in this brief time. And this collection of problems explains why people get stuck in this and they never get out. I spent about 5.5 years on the inpatient and outpatient side of treatment for addiction communities. And it was a real schooling experience for me. And everybody that I encountered that was an addict, and I'm gonna say it's roughly between 3,000 and 4,000 people that I personally had interaction with, I would agree that they had PTSD based on my observation. About a third of them had a official diagnosis of PTSD. But here's the funny thing. People that have PTSD do not necessarily have an addiction, but everybody who has an addiction has PTSD. And that little saying is a window into the smoking gun. So I'm not going to go for those pillars. Now this is kind of a funny thing. I just want to show you all this. This is the military and civilian criteria of PTSD, all right? Kind of a problem with that. In other words, they're saying there is no difference. And I'm going to tell you what the difference is in just a couple of a paragraph or two. The difference between advanced PTSD or military PTSD and civilian is very simple. Civilians have their trauma, what we call their primary trauma, somewhere in their childhood is what's common. Sometimes it's in early adulthood, but it's generally in the childhood. Some of those children go through that trauma, they go into the military. Then they get a level of traumatization that's way above what we should ever see. And I don't know about you, I have some military friends, and I don't know why they embrace me like almost like I was in the military. It's strange, but they do. And I know what a privilege that is. I had a client, his name was Tim O'Leary, not the LSD guy, but that was his name. He was on the beaches of Normandy. That's where he entered World War II. Survived all that. There was 11 guys that survived his 50,000 man battalion. 11. He was one of them. He got done with that, got taken prisoner, got beat, was going to get executed, and he asked for a cigarette from the German soldier that was going to execute him. So he gave him a cigarette, and he took his helmet out and beat him and bashed him in the head and walked a few miles in the snow in bare feet. And how I know that is I saw his bare feet once, and they were all gnarled up really, really bad. They beat his feet with a rubber hose, excuse me. Drink some water. Thank you. So let's get to that little story. The psychological recovery model of PTSD. Here's the program. Desensitize. Get you used to, if you're afraid of snakes, and you're really afraid, and I just say, I have a picture of a snake here, and you go, oh, okay. Then here's my picture. See what I'm doing? I'm desensitizing you to it or horrifying you. Which is up for debate. Then we do some talk to integrate what we learned from that experience of exhuming what that fear or trauma is all about. And then the question is, does that leave you at peace? I don't know about you. I've seen some people who've been in therapy for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And I'm always curious. I'm an intensely curious person to begin with, but I'm always really curious about how'd that go? I mean, what was the net result? I've never had somebody go, bump-a-da-bump-a-da-bump, bop. Never. People go, well, it's been a really good experience. I've learned a lot. They can't pull up specifics. They can't pull up something of significant, like, oh yeah, this was my breakthrough. I find that strange. So does whatever this does it last, and is it working? See, ask Vietnam vets, ask any vet that's in the VA in their system because they have PTSD or injuries or whatever. Ask them if it's working, and it's not. It's just not. So here's that 5 levels of PTSD. It's complex PTSD is referred to as a disorder of extreme stress. All right, so I'm going to skip on over to the golden stuff. So if I take 5 extra minutes, I can get you guys some more information. What do you think? I think I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's 4 stress types that I've been able to identify that contribute to your stress. It's a component to PTSD for sure, but if you're having stress, you're gonna identify with this right away. This is a stress episode. This is just saying you had a bad phone call, you had an 8-level stress, you had that reaction inwardly or outwardly, and the cause of that reaction is not your mind. It's 3 hormones: cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. If I had a magic syringe and I could come over to you and stick it in your arm and pull those 3 neurochemicals out of your arm, you'd cease feeling any kind of stress at all instantaneously. So it's a chemically mediated experience. We just believe. You guys all believed it's in your mind, right? Did you know that it was just a chemical experience? Part of why we are successful here is because we've identified what that chemical experience is. And it turns out your body has all kinds of ways to reverse all this stuff very naturally, very quickly, and very effectively. So that's what we do. So this episode of stress, where does that come from? Anybody? Have you ever been really extremely upset about something that before you weren't upset about? What's the difference?
State of mind.
State of mind. Maybe you had a bad day when you reacted really good or bad, and you were having a really great week when you didn't react in the same situation. So that's called background stress. This is what background stress looks like. Real quickly. What we do here is we install a drain to all of this neurochemical stuff. And we do that by first restoring your diaphragm's ability to breathe. I saw a friend of mine sent me one of the best videos I've ever seen ever on breathing properly, including diaphragmatic breathing. The only problem is his audience, about 94% of them, as far as I can tell, do not have a functioning diaphragm. The other 6% split an array of 25, 50, 75% functionality in their diaphragm. So these numbers I'm giving you are where they come from. About 30,000 goes at it for me, and times 3 for the practitioners that have helped me over the years in getting exposed to people. So what we're doing here is, this is the intensity of the background stress. Background stress, you won't see. You won't feel it for the most part. It's in the background. It's just outside your periphery. Heads are going like this, everybody's going like this, right? Because you know what I'm talking about. But it's not like you can point to it and, oh, I'm upset because that guy cut me off on the freeway. That's episodic stress. But the episodic is all built on this. The background stress. And this is what kills people with stress. This is how it happens. This gets so bad that when they go too far up this, look at this. It's a measure of the damage to homeostasis. Anybody not know what homeostasis is? So as you get more and more background stress, you're carrying such a heavy load, and you can't, when it's really heavy, you know, okay, I'm stressed, I'm tired. You'll know that much, but you won't be able to list out what's in your background stress. No way. Too much of that's unconscious because you've been collecting it. Okay, the third one is called chronic stress cycle syndrome. This was the first thing I distinguished of these 4 stress types. And this cycle is dastardly, it's hidden, it's covert, it's like a vortex that sucks the person in, and they never even know this is happening. It's self-explanatory. Trauma does start it, but like a lightning strike in a forest that starts a forest fire, the lightning strike isn't what's important. It's the forest fire. You gotta fight the forest fire. And what I see in the psychological model is that they go looking for where the lightning strike hit. And let's analyze that. Never mind about the forest fire. Does that make sense to you? So, as you can see, breathing is the first thing that happens after the fight or flight gets triggered. And what happens in the breathing is your diaphragm shuts off because you find something and you go, in a moment of extreme stress, with that ballistic inhale, diaphragm shuts off. And we had, just last week, we had a woman have her first session. She went out the parking lot and had some sort of traffic near miss with a guy in a truck, and the guy ended up following her all over town. She called the cops. You know, he was waiting for her. She went hit at a restaurant. So she was traumatized. She was like really, so she came in for her second session 2 days later. And you know, I'm expecting to see somebody who's pretty placid, pretty chilled out. She's happy, good. She was all anxious. I'm like, what happened? No, nothing. I said, look, something happened. What happened? And it popped into her mind just like that. She told me about it. What a mess. So this syndrome ends up with the cycle being all about chronic stress creates chronic hypoxia, and the supply can't meet the demand. And the difference between that supply and the demand is disease and death for our body and our brain. If you look at cells under a microscope and you suck out all the oxygen, that's it, they're dead. If you feed living tissue oxygen and not sugar and not acid, but alkaline and oxygen with some carbon dioxide, just enough, that is the most potent healing combination chemical on the planet. Because if you think about what nutrients our body needs, our brain needs, everybody in this room is educated on this topic. I'm just realizing that. Everybody. I'm gonna have to up my game then. So, oxygen is so much more an important nutrient to our body that we can only go seconds without air. Think about that. Only seconds. And yeah, you can hold your breath for a minute and a half. Great. How are you doing in that minute and a half? You know, you're not functioning very well. But you can go a week without water in the desert and survive. You can go a month without food. Just seconds without air. And a demo that I do a lot of times, I'm not going to do today, but I want you to pretend like I'm doing it to each one of you individually. I'm going to come up to you in your mind, and I'm just going to bring my hands around your neck. I'm not going to touch. I'm just going to get close. Are you imagining it? Do you feel the stress in your brain, your body? Did you feel it?
No.
So if you imagine me doing it,
Well, you said you were going to choke me, so I believe
not with a force field. Okay? You just imagine me doing it.
You trust
and you're
easy.
letting me. Okay, don't, you know, he's looking at me like, dude, you do it, I'm gonna suck you right now. You just imagine, and you will have a stress reaction. You can't stop it.
I believe you.
It's not something we can override. There's lots of things we can. That's not one of them, because it's our airway, and your brain will protect your airway with more veracity than anything else. Okay, so the last one, this one's really, really nasty. This is when you blow your lid, and when you're close to blowing your lid, have you ever noticed you can't think? When that's happening, you can't think because something has happened in your brain, an event called amygdala hijack syndrome. The amygdala is what's called an organelle. So this is an organ, and it has about 35 little mini organs that support it. This being one. It has one job. The amygdala's its only job is to neurologically turn off access to the frontal part of your brain. That's the thinking part of your brain. That's why you can't think when you get really, really upset. You could look at somebody that you've known for 10, 15, 30 years and forget their name for about 3 or 4 seconds. Because that front part of your brain is obliterated. Okay. Is this interesting to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Okay, one more little slide. We're going to call it a day with the slides anyway. So this chart is the left-hand side of a much larger chart. So just so you have a way to think about it. This chart here. This chart came out of 22,000 measurements, which is more than enough to substantiate any kind of scientific claim, which this does, many of them. For example, what it's saying is that your respiratory rate is so precise as what it will create in your physiology and psychology that we can have these things to rely on. So first of all, we're gonna go down to sleep result, exhausted. If you're breathing that fast, you're gonna wake up exhausted. I've never seen exceptions to this. People with PTSD, they have respiratory rates that are in the 28, 29, 30, somewhere in there, when they're talking about the complex version. So it predicts all these things. Look at the background stress, an 8 or more on a scale of 1 to 10. Proportionality of stress reaction, overwhelming disproportionate reaction. Have a little problem and you totally freak out. Why that is you don't have enough, you're hypoxic. You don't have enough oxygen going to your brain. Look, it's really simple. When we don't have enough oxygen going to our brain, what happens is we all go primitive. I don't know that you can change that. It's too rooted in our physiology to change that. Okay, so this left side here is what is in that other slide here. So, okay, so all of this information is going to be generated from the 7 compensations or direct links. A direct link, you can only say a direct link is if 5 times 5 is 25. We know that that's true. It's always been true. It'll always be true. You could say that we come under the umbrella of a direct link. So, like I said, the first thing that happens in reaction to a trauma is your body stops using its diaphragm. Here's why this is important. Your diaphragm is below the lungs. So you have lungs here, diaphragm below here. All the other breathing muscles are either on top of or above the lungs. So it's a simple problem of very basic physics that the muscles that are here and above are only going to effectively bring the air down to about halfway, and then it just loses its what we call mechanical advantage. That's where the diaphragm comes in. When it contracts, it pulls the lungs, it lengthens the lungs and creates a vacuum in the lower part of the lungs. And the result of that is that the air gets all the way to the bottom. It's no coincidence that about 70% of all lung disease pathologies that we know of are in the bottom of the lungs. So the bottom of the lungs have something the top don't have, and that is 7 times more oxygen transport capability. Remember I said it's a math problem? So when the air goes into the base of your lungs, you have this very rich, dense ability to get a lot of oxygen for every cubic centimeter of air. You get a lot more oxygen, 7 times more. So that's the smoking gun, because what that's going to cause is your brain only has one way to react to this, only one. Again, this science is 100 years before I was born. So that means it's 200 years ago. So it causes your body to have to breathe faster. If I only got the top half of my lungs to use, which is what you have, then you have to breathe faster in order to get enough air. So it's like pedaling faster. If you're in a low gear and you're pedaling really, really fast to go 15 miles an hour, that's what you're doing. You ever do that on a multi-speed bike? Your legs feel like they're going to fly off the knees, right? Okay. So the hyperventilation syndrome, the only thing the person's going to know. So let's say a trauma happened last month and we're looking at a person a month later. all they're going to know is that they're stressed, and all that stress is going to be tied to what? The trauma. So they're never going to look at this. And these numbers of 11 to 18, we'll say, there's no clinicians out there that are classically trained in the model that we have in our society. Not the alternative people, but conventional, Western medical science. They're going to look at those and they're going to go, what's wrong with that? I've had a respiratory therapist in charge of all of Kaiser hospitals tell me that's okay. To which I said, where did you go to school? It was the dumbest thing I ever heard a professional say. Because the patient was at 32 respiratory rate, which is why I intervened. Okay, so all the person knows is they feel stressed, but they're never going to tie it to this because it's too subtle. And what's going off in their mind is the fireworks of the trauma. And by the way, if you were exposed to a bomb or sexual trauma or spiritual trauma, chemical trauma, kinetic trauma, or an accident of some kind, guess what? Your brain uses the same program for all traumas. I don't know why, but I know it does. And this is what you're going to see here. So it doesn't matter what their trauma has been, this is going to be true. Okay, number 2. So what that says is hyperventilation syndrome leads to a drop in CO2, carbon dioxide. When that happens, you have to drop the delivery of oxygen. You immediately go into hypoxia. Can't stop that from happening. The only thing you can do to make it better is to sleep or try to sleep a lot, but you won't sleep very well. Because when you're hypoxic, guess what neurohormone gets released into your body brain? It's one that doesn't like sleep.
Cortisol?
Adrenaline?
Adrenaline. So now I'm laying there, I'm stressed. I don't know that why I'm stressed much more than the trauma is because my body's breathing too fast and my brain can't get oxygen. So my brain goes primitive on me. I'm trying to pull my brain back. Do you guys remember doing this? I'm pulling my brain back. I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to square myself up. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to be disciplined. I'm going to go and do my exercise. And you don't do it. This is what's happening. So this low grade hypoxia doesn't get anybody's attention yet. The problem is now more time's going by. Let's say we're now 6 months down the road. What we're having here is sympathetic stimulation. That means that the person is constantly getting a little jab. They're having a reaction. They're getting a jab of stress hormones somehow. Everything that they had in their life before, all of the things that have some intensity to them are now items that create stress. I had somebody here the other day that was explaining to me that her friends, she loves her friends, but she's too messed up right now. She can't handle being around them. These are people she loves. This is very common to an introverted personality. We don't have any of those in there, do we? All introverts? Oh my God, I got all the introverts today. So, sympathetic stimulation. Sympathetic is, if we look at a seesaw, this is sympathetic, this is parasympathetic. There's only 2 of them. That's why it's a seesaw. And you can't go like this. There's no that. This is how it works. So you're being stimulated into stress. Not maximum yet. We're not even close to that, sports fans. Now we start getting somewhere with getting really messed up with the stress. Call this about a year into it. The person all this time, think about this, 25,000 breaths minimum per day. Every one of them didn't have enough oxygen. A year later, the momentum that creates, can you see that in your mind? Here's the 4 stresses. And what happens is that they become master triggers, meaning that they just keep the person either a little or a lot triggered or somewhere in between. Now, if you've had PTSD yourself, you would be relating to what I'm saying. When you reach this point, you go over the cliff. Going over the cliff means bad things are happening to your health, your well-being, your psyche, your spirit. You're depressed, you have anxiety, your body hurts, you can't clear your mind, you go to sleep and your mind's going, whoa, 50,000 volts. Feels like I'm reading your email. That's how we are, all of us. We express it a little bit differently, yes, of course. So what you have here is hyperventilation syndrome, sustained too low of carbon dioxide, that's called hypocapnia. These combine to trigger more hyperventilation. So a year later, I find a new gear of destruction. Okay. The rest of this kind of just, you're going downhill like a madman with your hair on fire. So you have acid dominance because there are 3 reasons we breathe. One is to get oxygen. The other is to maintain acid alkaline balance in your body. That's a surprise to most people. And then the third purpose is to maintain a certain amount of carbon dioxide. People in our society have rebranded carbon dioxide, and scientists that are real scientists loathe this. We hate it. We hate it. How can you? They're taking the periodic table of elements and they're politicizing it. Bunch of hacks. Okay, that's all my statements I'm going to make. So you don't have enough carbon dioxide. You're acidic, and you've been going more and more and more and more acidic. Every breath you take, if it's too fast, your body's going to go acidic. This is a good one for you too. I want to talk to you about it after my talk. Okay? You can't sleep, so you're in non-recovery, and the homeostasis function in your body has broken down. Not so you're dead, just so you suffer. Just enough so you suffer. And what happens when you're this far in, this is 2 or 3 years in, you've tried everything, and it doesn't work. Why? Because all of these symptoms become concretized and interlocked. You can't sleep because your mind's going crazy. You can't stop your mind from going crazy because da 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 da. It keeps on going. It's just it's circular thinking. So that's it. That's my smoking gun. I'm currently writing a book on this. This happens to be one of the chapters.
Very cool.
Ta-da! Any questions? Okay. Well, I'll
You're
be
pretty
around.
thorough.
Yeah.
All right, so obviously he's going to be around for questions, and he'll take you through a few more slides if you feel like it. But right now, what we're going to do is we're going to have which one of you, Marissa?